What's up, folks, and welcome to a new era. Welcome to Babin On The Bayou. I am your host, Justin Babin Jr., and I am so unbelievably thrilled, pumped, and excited to start my brand new LSU sports podcast. I've talked about this as a dream of mine for a very long time, and now I'm getting to do it. Now I'm getting to pursue my dream. If you don't know a lot about me, my name is Justin Babin Jr. I am a recent LSU graduate, a recent LSU alum. I graduated from LSU last month in December of 2025 with a degree in mass communications, and now it's time for me to pursue my dream of covering LSU sports and starting my own LSU sports podcast. I love athletics. I love sports in general, but I especially love LSU sports, being born and raised right here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I'm so pumped to start this going. Again, this is the first ever episode of the Babin On The Bayou podcast, and let's get into it. In this podcast, it'll be a daily podcast Monday through Friday, so every weekday at 5 p.m. It'll come out right here on this very YouTube channel, and we'll cover LSU football, baseball, basketball, women's basketball, softball, you name it in the world of LSU athletics, and we'll cover it. And let's get into it. Let's get into the show. So, we're gonna spend the day. We're gonna spend the day talking about what LSU football has done so far in the transfer portal on the offensive side of the football. So that's what we're gonna do today. Obviously there was a big game yesterday in women's basketball. We'll talk about that later in the week. But women's basketball obviously getting a huge W inside the PMAC yesterday, taking down the undefeated 18-0 number 2 team in the country in the Texas Longhorns. We'll talk about that later in the week, but I really want to talk about what LSU football has done so far in the transfer portal on the offensive side of the football. We'll talk about the defensive side of the football tomorrow. But what did we see in 2025? You know, we're only a couple days in, almost 2 weeks into 2026. In 2025, we really saw a tale of two sports. And one is LSU baseball winning their historic 8th national championship in the history of that historic LSU baseball program in 2025. And 8 was so great, especially for me, getting the chance to go to Omaha and be there for the first time ever to witness my team win the national championship. It was so thrilling and so exciting. We may talk about that experience, my experience being in Omaha in 2025 in an episode down the line, but you're talking about the best coach in college baseball today in Jay Johnson. You don't see 2 national championships in 3 seasons in today's world of college baseball. You don't see that a lot. There's so many great programs out there. There's so many great teams out there any given year, but you're led by the best head man, the best head coach in the country, and you have the best college baseball program in the country. And I'm so pumped and excited for February 13th. That's going to be opening day, February 13th next month in Alex Box Stadium for LSU baseball against the University of Milwaukee. I believe that game is at 2 o'clock. I know it's on Friday, February 13th, and I'm very excited for opening day. We'll talk about LSU baseball definitely in the days and weeks to come leading up. But let's get into the other tail of the tape, and that's LSU football. And LSU football in 2025 under Brian Kelly was massively, massively disappointing. And it's a real shame because it started out so great with that week 1 opening week win at Clemson, your first win since 2019, your first week 1 win since 2019, and LSU fans were like, okay, can we make the playoff? What are we going to do with this? And then in the weeks after that, you just saw one of the worst offenses we've ever seen in the history of LSU football. From a play calling perspective, Joe Sloan was bad. From a quarterback perspective, Garrett Nussmeier didn't live up to the expectations that LSU fans had or that the national media had, quite frankly. Now, some of that was because of injury, you could say, because he was battling injury throughout the season. But bottom line, he just didn't live up to expectations. And then the offensive line was bad throughout the season as well, et cetera, et cetera. And it all led to the straw that broke the camel's back was the Texas A&M game. It was the Texas A&M game because Texas A&M came into Tiger Stadium, put up 49 points, and A&M fans took over the LSU student section in the fourth quarter, took over Tiger Stadium in the fourth quarter. A&M fans took Tiger Stadium over, and it was just flat out embarrassing. And it was one of the most embarrassing losses LSU football has ever suffered in the history of their football program. And the day after that, Brian Kelly gets fired, and then you bring in the number one guy that every school wanted, that you wanted, the number one guy in the coaching cycle, Lane Kiffin. And when you talk about Lane Kiffin and you look at his track record of success, specifically at Ole Miss, Ole Miss is not one of the most historic programs in the SEC. They're really towards the bottom half historically in terms of success in the SEC historically. But over 6 years at Ole Miss, multiple 10-win, double-digit win seasons. And in 2025, he led Ole Miss to their first 11-win regular season in program history. And they just got eliminated from the CFP semifinal. They made the Final Four with the roster and the staff and the team that Lane Kiffin built from the ground up. And especially you brought Lane Kiffin in because of the success he had at a program like Ole Miss, but also because of the success he's had year after year after year on the offensive side of the football. Because again, you needed juice. You needed to be reinvigorated by an offensive guru, by Lane Kiffin, one of the best offensive minds we've ever seen in the history of college football. And, Kiffin gets hired November 30th, and it starts out really well in December with the early national signing period. The high school signing class you only signed 14 recruits, which wasn't much, and it was a good class. It was a really good class, especially on the defensive side of the football. You did sign some receivers like Corey Barber, like Jabari Mack, like Braden Allen on the offensive side of the football. But really, when you talk about that high school signing class in December, you're talking about the defensive side of the football, and more specifically, the defensive line, bringing in the number one player in the country, number one athlete in the country, and Lamar Brown, who's going to play defensive line at LSU, the number one defensive tackle in the country, and Richard Anderson, one of the top edge rushers in the country, and Trent Henderson out of Pensacola, Florida. Like, that's what you talk about from that high school signing class in December. But going into the transfer portal, which opened up on January 2nd, and it's still open. It doesn't close till this Friday, I believe, January 16th. So it's a 2-week window for the portal to be open. Going into the portal, you obviously had a lot to do offensively. And we're going to kind of talk about that. I want to talk about, from an offensive perspective, what did you have to do going into the portal? So I want to break it down position by position. What were LSU's needs on the offensive side of the football going into the portal opening on January 2nd? Well, at quarterback, right, you didn't have a scholarship QB on the roster. Garrett Nussmeier graduates. He's headed to the NFL draft. We'll see how that goes. Michael Van Buren transfers out. Colin Hurley transfers out. So you obviously have a lot to do at the quarterback position going into the opening of the portal. At running back, obviously, Harlan Berry's still here, and I think Harlan Berry is going to be an absolute stud, an absolute star in Lane Kiffin's offense. I'll get into that a little bit later. But besides Harlan Berry, Jawan Johnson, Caleb Jackson, and Caden Durham, all of those guys transfer out. So you needed to add some depth behind Harlan Berry to fill up that running back room with some bodies. At tight end, you felt healthy because you had Trey'Dez Green, who's a 6'7" unicorn, who it really is going to be probably the best player on this team, maybe the best player on this offense heading into 2026. I'm so pumped to see. If there's two guys I'm excited to see in the LSU offense, it's Trey'Dez Green and Harlan Berry, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But then you go to the receiver position, and you lose a lot at receiver. You lose Chris Hilton, Kyle Parker, Aaron Anderson, Xavion Thomas, Teron Francis. You lose all of those guys, so you really have to rebuild that receiver room as well. And then on the offensive line, from the offensive line perspective, that's what really concerned me as well. Because if you don't know, LSU had 8 offensive linemen transfer out of the program in the past month. And a lot of those guys, some of those guys were starters. Some of those guys were really young guys that you wanted to see develop. And I know that the offensive line, the offense as a whole, was bad in 2025, one of the worst we've ever seen. But you wanted to keep some guys around for continuity purposes and not have to rebuild the entire offensive line through the portal. And that was my big concern. My two big concerns heading into the portal opening were on the offensive side of the football were quarterback and offensive line. I knew Lane Kiffin was going to be fine at receiver. He always finds receivers. He's going to be good there. But at quarterback and offensive line specifically, not having a scholarship QB on the roster when the portal opens is concerning. And then the offensive line, while bad in 2025, you had an exodus of offensive linemen from the program, with 8 offensive linemen transferring out and leaving the program here at LSU. So that was the state of your offense going into the transfer portal. And today we are going to talk about who you've got so far in the portal on the offensive line, on the offensive side of the football. Before we get into that, I want to talk about our daily sponsors here at Babin On The Bayou. Our daily sponsors here at Babin On The Bayou. Babin On The Bayou is presented to you and brought to you every single day, Monday through Friday, by Shield Heating and Cooling. And when you're talking about Shield Heating and Cooling, you're talking about a team of experts with decades of experience as leading experts in the AC industry. And I really love my audience. I really love my viewers. I really appreciate you guys for tuning in to the first ever episode of Babin On The Bayou. And I really want to reward you and reward my audience for that. So we got a special giveaway going on right now. I'm giving something to you. I want to give something to you. So if you call Shield Heating and Cooling today at the number 225-46-BAYOU. That's 225-46-BAYOU, BAYOU. If you call them at that number today and you tell them you heard about Shield Heating and Cooling from Babin On The Bayou, then I am giving away free AC system cleaning checks for every system in your house. So free AC cleanings and AC cleaning checks for every AC system in your house if you call Shield Heating and Cooling today at 225-46-BAYOU. So whether you have one AC system in your home or 4 or 5 AC systems in your home, if you call them at 225-46-BAYOU today and tell them you heard about Shield Heating and Cooling from the Babin On The Bayou show, if you do that, you will get a free cleaning check for every AC system and every AC unit in your house, saving you money. So call them today at 225-46-BAYOU to get a free AC cleaning check for every AC system in your home. We love Shield Heating and Cooling. We love the guys there. They're experts. You can trust them. Shield Heating and Cooling, your local comfort defender. So we love them. We appreciate them. They are the title sponsor for this show. So we appreciate them. Again, that's number is 225-46-BAYOU for your free AC system cleaning check for every AC system in your house. So now let's get into what you've got so far in the portal on the offensive side of the football. The number one thing I've loved, and we're going to get into the quarterback news and the offensive line news. We'll spend a lot of time there. The number one thing I've loved is what you've done at receiver, because you brought in guys that really fit Lane Kiffin's philosophy and Lane Kiffin's style of offense. What do I mean by that? When you talk about Lane Kiffin's offensive philosophy, obviously you're talking about a high-tempo, up-tempo offense, get the ball out of the quarterback's hands very, very quickly. And I mean, you're talking about explosive plays, you're talking about deep shots down the field. They also use the running back very, very well. Not a lot of people talk about that enough with Lane Kiffin's offense. It is not an air raid. It is not an air raid because you've seen guys especially at Ole Miss, like a Keywan Lacey and a Quinshon Judkins. You've seen that at Ole Miss. Running backs go off and lead Lane Kiffin's offenses at Ole Miss. So it's not an air raid. They love using the running back. That's one of the reasons I love Harlan Berry in the offense, because he's so versatile and he's not just a back that you hand the ball off to. He's a very good pass catcher as well. So that's why I think Harlan Berry is going to be a star for the LSU offense in 2026. But I love what you've done at receiver. You brought in like 7 or 8 guys at receiver, and some of them are depth pieces, and I think they could be used in a variety of ways. There's going to be definitely some competition, some healthy competition at the receiver position, but I really love some of these guys you brought in. You brought in guys like Eugene Wilson from Florida and Jace Brown from Kansas State, who have really produced at a high level at the college level at Power 4 schools. I mean, when you talk about Jace Brown from Kansas State, you're talking about a guy who had almost 2,000 total yards in 3 seasons as a Kansas State Wildcat, and he was the number 3 wide receiver in this year's portal class. And then Eugene Wilson, a guy who's also been very talented at Florida and done some good things at Florida as well. You also brought in a receiver like a Jackson Harris out of Hawaii and a Trey Brown out of Old Dominion. When you're talking about Trey Brown out of Old Dominion specifically, I love bringing in him because Trey Brown at Old Dominion in 2025 averaged 20.1 yards per catch, and 20.1 yards per catch was the 7th best yards per catch number in the entire country in 2025. And I love that because you talk about the explosive plays, you talk about the deep shots down the field. Trey Brown's a specific guy, and Jace Brown and Jackson Harris and all of these guys, but especially Trey Brown with the 20.1 yards per catch can really help this team to stretch the ball down the field, which was a real issue in 2025. A lot of it was because of how poor your offensive line was, but you just had no deep threat. You had zero deep threat in 2025 with the LSU offense. No way to stretch the ball down the field. And I really think you fixed that. You've really loaded up this receiver room in the past week. With the guys you've got. Another guy, again, Jackson Harris from Hawaii, another vertical threat. When you look at Jackson Harris from Hawaii at receiver on tape, he's got really good size at receiver, and what I like about Jackson Harris is he adds another red zone threat. I mean, he had 12 touchdowns in 2025 at the University of Hawaii, and yes, I know it's Hawaii, and I know it's the Mountain West Conference. It's not the SEC conference, it's not, but you don't just luck in the 12 touchdowns. And really, what we've seen in the red zone is over the last few seasons is outside of Trey Green, you haven't really had a really good red zone threat, and Jackson Harris adds that threat with the touchdown numbers that he produced in 2025 at Hawaii. You've also brought in some guys like Josh Jackson from McNeese, Malik Elzy from Illinois, and then recently you brought in Winston Watkins Jr., who transferred over from Ole Miss. Winston Watkins Jr., former 4-star out of high school, and he received a ton of praise from Kiffin in 2025. Again, one season at Ole Miss under Kiffin in 2025 as a freshman. And as a freshman, he did some really good things. He caught 26 balls for 373 receiving yards, which was good for 15.1 yards per catch. So another explosive threat as well. He also had a touchdown in 15 games as well. So look, whether it's Jace Brown, Jackson Harris, Trey Brown, Eugene Wilson, Winston Watkins Jr., what I love about what you've done at receiver is you brought in some guys that can help you in the red zone, like Jackson Harris, be another red zone touchdown threat, and you brought in guys that can really stretch the field vertically. When you look at yards per catch numbers, which is a really good sign for the deep threat, and you look at 20.1 yards per catch for Trey Brown, 15.1 yards per catch for Winston Watkins Jr. Again, your issue in 2025, one of your big issues was you could not stretch the field vertically. And these receivers can definitely do that. They can definitely do that. And that's something I'm super excited to see for the Tigers in 2025 when you talk about what they've done. So yeah, I love what you've done at receiver. I love what you've done at the receiver position. Outside of receiver, I also love what you've done. Uh, I mean, you brought in some good guys at running back as well behind Harlan Berry. Obviously, I told you I think Harlan Berry is going to be the star in this LSU offense for 2026 because of how versatile he can be out of the backfield, not only as a running back but as a pass catcher in the passing game as well. I really like what Harlan Berry can do. But you brought in a guy like Ray Guillory out of Utah and Rod Gainey out of Charlotte as well. And when you look at really depth pieces, those are good guys to add as depth pieces, especially Ray Guillory. Ray Guillory, if you don't know, out of Utah, is a guy that Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr., the new LSU offensive coordinator, was the offensive coordinator at Ole Miss, really recruited hard out of high school. They recruited Ray Guillory very hard out of high school. He chose to ultimately sign with the University of Utah, but after one season at Utah, he transfers to LSU, and reportedly Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr. really like what Ray Guillory can provide. So obviously at running back, Harlan Berry is going to be the guy. Harlan Berry is obviously going to be the guy, but there'll be some healthy competition for the second back behind him. I like what you have at tight end with Trey'Dez Green. As I said before, matchup nightmare at 6'7" in the end zone. I mean, you saw it. You saw it in the bowl game, in the Texas Bowl, right, where Trey'Dez Green, just former basketball player, pretty much bodies the guy in the end zone and says, "Get off me! I'm gonna catch this football." Pretty much one-handed, and that's Trey'Dez Green. That's Trey'Dez Green. He's got great size, and he's just a nightmare at tight end. But you've also brought in a guy like Malachi Thomas at tight end. Malachi Thomas played at Pitt. He could be a guy who could serve kind of as in a blocking role as a tight end, because Trey'Dez Green blocking role still has a lot to develop. Obviously, he's a big receiver threat, but I do like that you brought in Malachi Thomas as well. But really, the two positions of concern going into this, as I mentioned before, were the offensive line and the quarterback position. So when you look at that, when you look at offensive line and you look at quarterback, what have you done so far? Well, you brought in guys like Jaquan Sprinkle, who played 27 games at NC Central. You brought in William Satterwhite from Tennessee, who has SEC experience as a backup center at Tennessee. You brought in Jacoby Jones, who played at JUCO Colin College, I believe. And then recently, I believe today actually, you brought in offensive tackle Darren Stray, who played for offensive line coach Eric Wolford at Kentucky, and as a former four-star prospect, Darren Stray's got some really good size. He's 6'7" and 305 pounds. But you brought in Jacoby Jones, Darren Stray, Jaquan Sprinkle, and William Satterwhite. So you brought in 4 offensive linemen. You probably need to add like 2 more. I do love the news that Braylon Moore is staying. Obviously, Braylon Moore was your starting center this past season, and with how bad your offensive line was, one of the only bright spots was Braylon Moore because of his experience playing as starting at center for 2 years at Virginia Tech before he came to LSU, and he was pretty solid at center this year, so I'm glad that Braylon Moore has decided to come back. And look, Weston Davis is also coming back. And then you have these young guys like Satterwhite coming in. And look, the issue for me on the offensive line with Brian Kelly and Brad Davis, who was your former offensive line coach, it's not that they didn't bring in high-level recruits. They brought in plenty of 4 and 5 stars on the offensive line. But the development was absolutely atrocious for these guys. They came to the program as 4 and 5 stars, and then there was no development. There was no development from a position of that you needed. But I do love you bring in Eric Wolford, who is a talented offensive line coach under Nick Saban at Alabama, spent years and years at different stops around the SEC, and I hope that not only bring in the 4 and 5-star talent, which Brian Kelly and Brad Davis did, but the development on the offensive line is going to be key. And it's the position that I'm concerned about going into 2026, because you're going to have to, like, two of your starters may be guys that you've had before that you had in 2025, but the rest of the guys, you're going to have a lot of guys that are from other programs, and you got to hit on all of them, or most of them at least 3 to 4 of them. And that's a concern from a chemistry perspective, from a, you got to have chemistry as an offensive line, and then you got to develop with your quarterback. Okay, news at quarterback. The news at quarterback. So, you didn't have any scholarship quarterback signed out of the transfer portal through the first week of the portal. You had a quarterback signed yesterday, and you had one signed this morning. Let's talk about Elon's Landon Clark. You signed him yesterday out of Elon. He is from FCS Elon, and I understand that you're like, oh, it's an FCS school. I'll get into that a little bit later. But Landon Clark, what I like about him on tape is he's very mobile. He's a very fast quarterback, and he rushed for over 600 yards at Elon in 2025. So, which is a good number. And that was another big issue for the LSU offense in 2025, was that Garrett Nussmeier was a statue at quarterback. In today's version of football, professionally and at the college football level, look at guys like Lamar Jackson. Look at guys like Josh Allen. Look at guys like Patrick Mahomes. Even look at guys like Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow wasn't, like, elite in terms of mobility, but he can still run. Like, he can still run, and he's still willing to tuck it down and scramble for a couple yards. Garrett Nussmeier wasn't willing to do that, and he was very hesitant in doing that. And that was your problem in 2025, or one of your problems, especially with a bad offensive line, right? And I do love Landon Clark, the fact that he had 2,900 total yards at Elon in 2025, and I believe 2,300 passing, 614 rushing. So I love the mobility from Landon Clark. He's got, I believe, 3 years of eligibility remaining. So he's a guy who can develop, and he's going to compete for starting quarterback opportunities, obviously. But he's a guy who can obviously develop and potentially be there for you down the line. And I love his mobility. And let's talk about Sam Leavitt. So let's talk about Sam Leavitt now. So you signed Sam Leavitt today. Sam Leavitt, the number one transfer portal quarterback in the country in this transfer portal class, you sign him. I like bringing in Sam Leavitt. I have a few concerns. I do have a few concerns. But he was really good at Arizona State. He led Arizona State to a Big 12 title and a college football playoff appearance in 2024. So he's done some really good things there. My concern about Sam Leavitt is the Liz Frank injury that required him to have foot surgery, and that foot surgery subsequently cut his 2025 season short at Arizona State. The report is that Sam Leavitt will not be able to practice in the spring with LSU because of that foot surgery that he had. And that's concerning, because you got to build rapport with your receivers. You got to think you've never thrown to these receivers before. You've never thrown to them before. And the fact that Sam Leavitt can't train in the spring or can't practice in the spring is a concern. And then it's a different offensive scheme and a different offensive system. Lane Kiffin's one of the best offensive minds we've ever seen in college football. But it's a different scheme, it's a different system, and it's one you have to learn. And my concern with Sam Leavitt, quite frankly, is that he's not going to be able to do any of that in the spring because of his foot injury. But he had really good experience at Arizona State. He led them to a playoff. He led them to a Big 12 title in 2024. He's the number one transfer portal quarterback in terms of rankings in this transfer portal cycle. And look, he's a guy you needed. You needed to bring him in, and he's going to be ready for fall. He's going to be ready for, hopefully, fall camp, obviously. And if he is, that's great. My only concern is the injury and how long he's not going to be able to practice with LSU and learn with LSU. That is my sole concern for Sam Levitt. But I'm very excited that because 2 days ago you didn't have a scholarship QB on the roster. Now you have two. I like Landon Clark's potential developing under Lane Kiffin, and I love his mobility as well. And then I like bringing in Sam Levitt, obviously the top transfer portal QB in the country. The foot surgery is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to monitor. But if he can be healthy by the fall, he can be really good because he has experience. And look, how I want to discuss this and how I want to frame this is, look, you brought in Lane Kiffin to be your head coach and to largely retool and reinvent the LSU offense that was so terrible in 2025. That's what you did. So you brought him in to do that. And now you got to trust him. You got to trust him, especially on the offensive line. You got to trust him and offensive line offensive line coach Eric Wolford to retool that offensive line and find the right guys. They find guys in the transfer portal. Now you got to develop them, and they got to be ready for September 5th in Tiger Stadium against Clemson. And then at quarterback, look, I can hear all the talk about Landon Clark's from Elon and he's from an FCS school. I need to remind you guys that Trinidad Chambliss was a 3-year starter at Division II Ferris State before he transferred into Ole Miss and became one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football in 2025. And he's a guy that at this point I would consider, if I'm an NFL organization, drafting. Because I think Trinidad Chambliss had an incredible playoff, especially the second half in the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. He was phenomenal, leading Ole Miss to that upset win over Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. So that guy, Trinidad Chambliss, was at D2 Ferris State for multiple years. And Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr. identified his talent. I believe Charlie Weiss Jr. says that the first film and highlights he ever saw of Chambliss was on Twitter, was on X. And they identified him, they brought him in, and he became one of the best quarterbacks in the country in 2025 under Lane Kiffin's system. So look, I trust Lane Kiffin. I trust him offensively. I trust Charlie Weiss Jr. offensively, looking at what they did in the playoff. Without Lane Kiffin, Charlie Weiss Jr. was in his bag, especially in the game against Georgia. The offensive play calling was spectacular from Charlie Weiss Jr. in the Sugar Bowl. And so, look, overall as an offense, yes, there's a lot to do here. You can still probably add maybe 2 more offensive linemen. I would love to bring in another quarterback so you could have 3 quarterbacks on your roster. Maybe add 1 more running back so you could have a good solid room of 4. But look, I love what you've done, especially at the receiver position in the portal. And then you brought in some guys for depth at tight end and running back. You add Landon Clark, who's really got a couple years of eligibility remaining, 3 years of eligibility remaining, I believe. Really mobile quarterback who Lane Kiffin can mold and develop. You bring in Sam Levitt as that veteran piece who's probably going to be the absolute front runner to start for you in 2026 if he's healthy by the fall. That's what all of us LSU fans are talking about. And then my biggest concern is the offensive line, because we saw how much a bad offensive line can cost you and cost your offense in 2025. The LSU offensive line was bad, and as a result of that, the offense as a whole was bad, and the offensive line was a big part of that. So that's my concern, but at this point, Lane Kiffin's the guy I wanted. Lane Kiffin's the guy most LSU fans wanted, and now we got to trust him. We got to trust that he knows what he's doing, and I do. Again, one of the best offensive minds we've ever seen in the history of college football, and I trust him. And I think you need to give them the benefit of the doubt to figure this out and develop. Again, I love what they've done at receiver and positions like that. The receiver room is going to be loaded in 2026 with all the guys you got, and then at quarterback and offensive line, you got to trust the staff that you brought in and the guy you brought in to develop the talent you have and prepare you for September 5th of 2026. I thank you guys so much for tuning in to the show. Like, really, I'm so pumped to start this brand new journey. It is so exciting for me. Do me a favor, like this video, share this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Again, new show, new episode Monday through Friday right here on this YouTube channel at 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Tomorrow we'll talk about what LSU has done in the transfer portal so far on the defensive side of the football. Later in the week, we may talk about some other stuff outside of LSU, like NFL playoffs. That was fun this weekend. We may talk about that. We'll talk about women's basketball and what they did taking down the number 2 team in the country in Texas. But again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you like this video. I hope you share this video, subscribe. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great Monday.